A farmer's son fixed a sheriff's broken truck for free, but the next morning, a military helicopter landed in their field with an unexpected surprise. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The midday sun beat down on Jacob Parker's back as he bent over the engine of the rusted tractor. Sweat dripped from his brow, leaving dark spots on the dry earth beneath him. At 23, his hands were already calloused and weathered, like those of a man twice his age. Years of working alongside his father on their struggling farm had taught him how to coax life into machines that most people would have scrapped long ago. "Damn it," he muttered, reaching deeper into the engine compartment. The wrench slipped, sending a jolt of pain through his knuckles. Jacob pulled his hand back, a thin line of blood appearing across his skin. He wiped it on his already stained jeans and reached for an old rag. From the farmhouse porch, his father watched with tired eyes. William Parker had farmed this land for 40 years, just as his father had before him. But 3 consecutive years of drought had pushed them to the brink. The bank letters were piling up on the kitchen table, each one more threatening than the last. "Any luck?" William called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Jacob shook his head, wiping grease from his hands. "Fuel pump's completely shot, and we can't afford a new one until harvest." Both men knew what remained unspoken, if there would even be a harvest worth selling this year. The sound of tires on gravel drew their attention to the long driveway leading up to the farmhouse. A white sheriff's department pickup truck approached, dust billowing behind it. "Sheriff Collins!" William straightened his worn cap, a reflexive gesture of respect despite the complexity of their relationship. In a small town like Millfield, everyone knew everyone, and Sheriff Tom Collins and William Parker had a history that stretched back to high school. The truck shuddered to a stop, the engine making an unhealthy knocking sound before dying altogether. The driver's door opened, and Sheriff Collins stepped out, his tall frame unfolding from the cabin. Despite being in his mid-50s, he moved with the confidence of a younger man, his sheriff's badge catching the sunlight as he approached. "Will." He nodded, then turned to Jacob. "Jacob." "Sheriff," they responded in unison. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Since William's wife, Jacob's mother, had died 5 years ago, the relationship between the Parker men and Sheriff Collins had grown strained. Rumors around town suggested that Tom and Susan Parker had been more than just high school sweethearts before she chose William instead. "Sound like you might be having some engine trouble," Jacob offered, breaking the tension. The sheriff glanced back at his truck, frowning. "County keeps cutting the maintenance budget. Been putting off getting it looked at." He turned back to William. "Actually came by to talk about the Peterson property. Thought you should know they sold to that big agricultural corporation from out of state." William's face fell. The Petersons owned the land adjacent to theirs, and they'd always had an agreement about water rights. A corporate owner would change everything. "Anyway," the sheriff continued, "thought you should hear it from me first." As he turned to leave, his truck failed to start, the engine grinding but not catching. After 3 attempts, he slammed his palm against the steering wheel in frustration. Jacob approached the truck, wiping his hands on his rag. "Mind if I take a look?" The sheriff hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, he nodded, popping the hood. Jacob's hands moved with practiced ease, checking connections, testing components. 20 minutes later, he had identified the problem. "Ignition module's shot," he announced. "Got a spare one that should fit from an old truck we junked last year. Won't take more than an hour to replace." Sheriff Collins reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Jacob waved him off. "Don't worry about it, just doing what neighbors do." The sheriff's brow furrowed. He was not accustomed to charity, especially from the Parkers. "I can't let you do that. Your family needs the money." "We don't need your money, Tom," William interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. Jacob shot his father a warning look. "It's no problem, really. I'll have you on your way before dinner." As Jacob worked on the sheriff's truck, William retreated to the porch, watching the interaction with a complex mix of emotions. The sheriff stood awkwardly to the side, checking his phone occasionally, but mostly observing Jacob's skilled hands. "Where'd you learn to work on engines like this?" he finally asked. Jacob shrugged without looking up. "Self-taught, mostly. Can't afford to call a mechanic every time something breaks down out here." "You've got a gift," the sheriff said quietly. "Your mother would be proud." Jacob's hands stilled for a moment at the mention of his mother, then resumed working. "Thanks," he said simply. An hour later, the sheriff's truck rumbled to life, running smoother than it had in months. Jacob closed the hood with a satisfied nod. Sheriff Collins extended his hand. "I appreciate this, Jacob. I won't forget it." As the sheriff's truck disappeared down the driveway, William approached his son. "You didn't have to do that, you know." "I know," Jacob replied, putting his tools away, "but it was the right thing to do." William studied his son's face, recognizing Susan's kindness in his eyes. "Your mother always said kindness comes back to you in unexpected ways." That night, Jacob lay awake in his childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The weight of their financial troubles pressed down on him. The bank had given them until the end of the month to make a payment, or they'd foreclose on the farm that had been in their family for generations. The repair job he'd done for the sheriff would have brought in much-needed cash, but something in him couldn't take money from a man who had once loved his mother. His thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of his father's muffled coughs. The doctor in town had prescribed medication for William's worsening condition, but the prescription remained unfilled. They simply couldn't afford it. Jacob turned onto his side, his decision crystallizing in his mind. Tomorrow he would drive into the city and look for work. The farm was dying, and with it, his father's health was deteriorating. He needed to find another way. Morning came with the familiar crowing of their rooster. Jacob rose with the sun, as he had every day of his life. He made coffee and prepared a simple breakfast of toast and eggs for his father. William emerged from his bedroom, his face gray with fatigue. "You're up early," he observed, eyeing the packed duffel bag by the door. "Thought I'd head into the city, look for some mechanic work," Jacob explained, setting a plate in front of his father. "Just for a while, to get us through until harvest." William's eyes clouded. They both knew what this meant. If Jacob left, there would be no harvest. Not with William's health the way it was. "This land is your legacy, son," William said quietly. "I don't want you giving up on it because of me." Jacob sat across from his father, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not giving up. I'm finding another way." Their conversation was cut short by an unusual sound, the distinctive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter blades cutting through the air. They exchanged confused glances before hurrying outside. A massive military helicopter hovered above their field, sending waves through the struggling cornstalks. The noise was deafening as the aircraft descended, landing with surprising gentleness in the empty section of field they hadn't planted this year due to lack of funds. "What the hell?" William shouted over the noise, his hand instinctively gripping Jacob's shoulder. The rotor blades slowed, and the side door of the helicopter slid open. A man in a crisp military uniform stepped out, followed by two others in dark suits. Even from a distance, Jacob could see the rows of medals adorning the military man's chest. "General Phillips," William whispered in disbelief, recognition dawning on his face. "After all these years—" Jacob turned to his father in confusion. "You know him?" William's face had gone pale. "From another life, son. One I never told you about." The general approached them with purposeful strides, his eyes fixed on William. The two men in suits flanked him, their expressions unreadable. "William Parker," the general called out, his voice carrying authority even without the uniform. "It's been a long time." "27 years," William replied, his voice barely audible. The general stopped a few feet away, studying William's weathered face. "We need to talk," he said simply. "It's happening again." William's hand tightened on Jacob's shoulder. "My son has the highest security clearance possible by blood relation," the general interrupted. "And after what he did for Sheriff Collins yesterday, we have reason to believe he may be exactly what we need." Jacob looked between the two men, completely lost. "What's going on? Dad?" William took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving the general's face. "Jacob, there are things about my past, about your mother's past, that I never told you. Things I hoped would stay buried forever." The general's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Will, but you always knew this day might come." The men in suits stepped forward, one of them holding out a folder stamped with a classified seal. "Mr. Parker, we need your help, both of you." As Jacob took the folder with trembling hands, he realized that the life he had known, the simple existence of a farmer's son, was about to change forever. The repair he had performed out of simple kindness had somehow set in motion events that would unearth long-buried secrets and alter the course of his future in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Jacob stared at the classified folder in his hands, its weight seeming to increase with each passing second. Around them, the helicopter's rotors slowed to a stop, the sudden silence almost as deafening as the noise had been. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," General Phillips suggested, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting to find unwelcome observers in the empty fields that stretched for miles. William nodded stiffly, leading the unusual procession toward the farmhouse. Jacob fell into step beside his father, studying the older man's profile. "Dad?" he whispered, but William shook his head slightly, his message clear. "Not now." Inside the modest kitchen, the visitors seemed out of place among the worn furniture and dated appliances. The men in suits remained standing near the door, while General Phillips took a seat at the kitchen table without waiting for an invitation. "Coffee?" William offered, his farmer's hospitality emerging despite the tension. The general nodded. "Black, 2 sugars, just like the old days." As William busied himself with the coffee maker, Jacob placed the folder on the table and sat across from the general. Up close, he could see the man was older than he'd first appeared, probably in his 60s, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. "Sir," Jacob began, unable to contain himself any longer, "I don't understand what's happening. What does this have to do with fixing Sheriff Collins' truck?" The general's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Sometimes the smallest actions reveal the most about a person's character. He accepted the mug William handed him with a nod of thanks. "Sheriff Collins works for us, in a manner of speaking, a local asset. When you fixed his vehicle, it triggered a notification." "A notification?" Jacob repeated, bewildered. "For a simple repair job?" "Not for the repair itself," one of the suited men interjected. "For the method you used. The ignition module bypass you created isn't documented in any repair manual. It's a field modification technique developed for military vehicles in Afghanistan." William set a mug in front of Jacob with a heavy sigh, then lowered himself into a chair at the head of the table. "They think you have the same aptitude, the same intuition that I had." The general took a sip of his coffee. "Your father was one of the finest mechanical engineers the Special Forces ever had. Could fix anything with next to nothing. Saved my life more times than I can count with his improvisations." Jacob turned to his father in disbelief. "You were in the military? Special Forces?" William's weather-beaten face seemed to age further under his son's gaze. "For 12 years before I came back to take over the farm, when your grandfather got sick. But you always said you'd never left Millfield except for that agricultural program in Kansas." "Kansas was our cover story," William admitted, staring into his coffee. "Your mother and I both served. That's how we met." The revelation left Jacob reeling. He'd grown up with stories of his parents meeting at a county fair, of his father working the family farm his entire life. Every childhood memory now felt tinged with doubt. "I don't understand," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why keep it a secret all these years?" General Phillips exchanged glances with William before answering. "Your parents were part of a highly classified program. When they left service, maintaining that cover story became part of their new life." William finally looked up at his son, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. "We wanted a normal life for you, Jacob. Away from all of that." "All of what?" Jacob demanded, frustration edging into his voice. The general reached over and flipped open the folder that lay forgotten on the table. Inside were satellite images of what appeared to be a remote installation surrounded by mountains. "This is a research facility in Kazakhstan. 2 days ago, it went dark. All communications ceased, and a security protocol was activated, a protocol that only 5 people in the world knew about." He looked pointedly at William. "One of those 5 was your father." William's face had gone ashen. "Operation Nightingale," he murmured. "I thought it was shut down." "It was," the general confirmed grimly. "Or so we were told. Apparently, some aspects of the project continued under deep cover." Jacob looked between the 2 men, struggling to follow. "What is Operation Nightingale?" William's eyes met the general's, some unspoken message passing between them. Finally, William turned to his son. "It was a joint program between several allied nations, developing technology that was ahead of its time. Your mother was the lead scientist. I was responsible for the mechanical implementation of her theoretical designs." "What kind of technology?" Jacob pressed. "The kind that could change the balance of global power," one of the suited men answered cryptically. The general leaned forward. "We need to send in a team to secure the facility and retrieve or destroy any remaining technology before it falls into the wrong hands. The problem is, the security systems were designed by your parents. They're keyed to genetic markers, specifically the Parker genetic code." Jacob's mind raced to keep up. "You're saying only someone from our family can get inside?" "Not just anyone," William said quietly. "The systems were designed to recognize either Susan or me, or my DNA," Jacob finished, understanding dawning. "Because I'm your son." The general nodded. "The system would recognize you as sharing your parents' genetic markers." Jacob stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. "This is insane. You want me to go to Kazakhstan to some secret facility because of who my parents are? I'm a farmer, not a soldier." "You're more than a farmer," the general countered calmly. "That repair you did on the sheriff's truck proves it. You have your father's mechanical intuition and your mother's problem-solving skills. It's in your blood." "This isn't his fight," William interjected, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "He knows nothing about that world." "The facility contains technology your wife developed," the general said, his tone hardening. "Technology that in the wrong hands could be catastrophic. We need someone who can not only get past the biometric security but also understand enough about the mechanics to safely extract or neutralize what's inside." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts in chaos. "Even if I wanted to help, I can't just leave. The farm will be taken care of," the general promised. "All your debts cleared, the best medical care for your father, and a substantial compensation for your service." Jacob stared at him in disbelief. "You're trying to bribe me with our farm?" "I'm offering you a way to save it," the general corrected, "and potentially save countless lives in the process." William rose slowly, his chair scraping against the worn linoleum. "Jacob, may I speak with you outside, please?" Once on the porch, away from their visitors, William gripped his son's shoulders. "Listen to me carefully. What they're asking is dangerous, more dangerous than they're letting on. Then why would you ever agree to be part of it? Jacob asked, the hurt of decades of deception evident in his voice. William's eyes softened. Because your mother and I believed we were creating something that would protect people, not harm them. But things became complicated. That's why we left. He took a deep breath. If what they're saying is true, if Nightingale has been reactivated, then someone needs to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. But that someone doesn't have to be you. Jacob studied his father's face, seeing new lines of worry etched there. What exactly did Mom create? William glanced back toward the house before answering in a low voice. A new kind of energy source. Clean, nearly unlimited. But the technology had unexpected applications. Military applications that Susan never intended. Inside the house, the telephone rang. Through the window, they could see one of the suited men answering it, his expression growing more serious as he listened. They won't give up, William continued. If you refuse, they'll find another way. They always do. So you're saying I should go? Jacob asked incredulously. William shook his head. I'm saying that whatever you decide, do it for the right reasons. Not for the money, not for the farm, and not because they're pressuring you. The screen door creaked open, and General Phillips stepped onto the porch. We've just received word, he announced without preamble. A Russian Special Forces team is en route to the facility. Our window is closing. Jacob looked from the general to his father, feeling the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on him. The farm that had been his whole world now seemed small compared to the global implications of what he was being asked to do. If I agree to help, he said carefully, I want everything in writing. The farm, Dad's medical care, all of it. Jacob, William began to protest, but his son cut him off. And I want you to tell me everything, Jacob continued, fixing the general with a steady gaze. No more secrets. I want to know exactly what my mother created and why it's worth risking my life for. The general's expression remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. The full briefing will occur en route. As for the other terms, you have my word. Your word isn't good enough, Jacob replied, surprising himself with his boldness. I want to see the papers before we leave. A tense silence followed, before the general finally nodded. Very well. The documents will be prepared immediately. He turned to go back inside, then paused. We leave in 1 hour, Mr. Parker. I suggest you pack light. As the door closed behind him, William looked at his son with a mixture of pride and concern. You remind me of your mother right now. She never took anyone's word at face value either. Jacob swallowed hard, the reality of his decision beginning to sink in. Tell me I'm not making a mistake. William's hand came to rest on his shoulder, warm and steady. In my experience, son, the right choice rarely feels like one when you're making it. The hour passed in a blur of activity. Jacob packed a small duffel bag with essentials, while William sat at the kitchen table, signing a stack of documents that one of the suited men, who had introduced himself as Agent Harris, produced from a sleek briefcase. Each signature seemed to pain William more than his worsening cough, though Jacob knew it wasn't physical discomfort causing his father's distress. All medical expenses covered, retroactive to 3 months ago, Agent Harris explained, sliding another document forward. Full debt forgiveness on the farm mortgage and agricultural loans, and a stipend for living expenses during your son's absence. William's weathered hand hovered over the page. And if something happens to Jacob? The agent didn't flinch. Full ownership of the farm transfers to you, free and clear, along with a significant compensation package. Blood money, William muttered, but signed anyway. Upstairs, Jacob placed a framed photograph of his mother in his bag. Susan Parker smiled back at him from the image. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, and a warm smile that had always made him feel safe. Now he wondered how much of her life had been hidden from him. How many other secrets were buried beneath the surface of his family's history? When Jacob returned downstairs, General Phillips was studying a tablet with a furrowed brow. He looked up as Jacob entered. "Ready?" Jacob nodded, though he felt anything but ready. He turned to his father, who had risen from the table and stood with the rigid posture that Jacob now recognized as military bearing rather than the stiffness of age. "Dad, William pulled him into a fierce embrace, cutting off his words. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice low enough that only Jacob could hear. "Trust your instincts, not their explanations, and remember what your mother always said. Understanding comes before action," Jacob finished. It had been one of Susan's favorite phrases when teaching him anything new, from algebra to changing a tire. William nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Come back to me, son." "Count on it," Jacob replied, forcing a confidence he didn't feel. The helicopter ride was mostly silent. Jacob sat wedged between Agent Harris and another agent, introduced only as Mercer, watching the familiar landscape of their farm disappear beneath them. General Phillips sat opposite, occasionally speaking into a secure satellite phone in clipped, technical language that Jacob couldn't follow. 2 hours later, they landed at a private airfield where a sleek Gulfstream jet waited. Inside, the aircraft was outfitted like a mobile command center, with communications equipment and computer workstations, replacing the luxury seating Jacob would have expected. "We'll reach Kazakhstan in approximately 14 hours, General Phillips explained as they settled in for takeoff. "During that time, you'll receive a full briefing on Operation Nightingale and be fitted with the necessary equipment." Once they were airborne, Agent Harris approached with a digital tablet. "Before we begin, we need you to sign the final non-disclosure agreements." Jacob took the tablet. "More paperwork? You already own my farm and possibly my life. What else could you possibly want?" "Your silence." Mercer spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his imposing physique. "What you're about to learn is classified at the highest levels. Fewer than 50 people in the world know the full scope of Nightingale." Jacob signed the documents with a resigned swipe of his finger. "All right, I've signed your papers. Now tell me what my mother created that's worth all this." General Phillips nodded to Harris, who dimmed the cabin lights. A projection appeared on the blank wall of the cabin, complex schematics that Jacob could only partially comprehend despite his mechanical aptitude. In 1997, Susan Parker theorized a way to harness energy from subatomic particles in a manner previously thought impossible, the general began. By 2001, she had developed a working prototype with your father's assistance. We called it the Quantum Extraction Device, or QED. Images of a device about the size of a microwave appeared on the screen. Jacob leaned forward, recognizing elements of his mother's distinctive design style in the elegant efficiency of its components. The QED generates more power than a nuclear reactor with zero radiation and no waste products. A single device could power a small city indefinitely. "Clean energy," Jacob murmured. "That's what Dad meant." The general nodded. "Initially, yes, but then we discovered its other capabilities." The image changed to show test results and experimental data. The quantum field generated by the device has unusual properties. It can disrupt electronic systems, shield against certain types of radiation, and most significantly, he paused, meeting Jacob's eyes, it can render conventional weapon systems inoperable within its range. Jacob absorbed this information, beginning to understand the implications. A defense system, something that could neutralize missiles, bombs. Exactly. In the right hands, the QED could end armed conflict as we know it. Any nation possessing this technology could effectively shield itself from attack while maintaining a normal power grid. "And in the wrong hands?" Jacob asked, already knowing the answer. Agent Harris took over. If modified, the device could be weaponized, used offensively to disable enemy defenses before an attack. Or worse, the field could potentially be focused, creating a directed energy weapon of unprecedented power. Jacob shook his head. So either the ultimate defense or the ultimate offense. No wonder my parents wanted out. The general's expression hardened. They didn't just want out, Mr. Parker. They sabotaged the project before they left. Destroyed key components and all digital records of the final design. Good for them, Jacob replied defiantly. Your mother wasn't naive, the general continued, ignoring Jacob's comment. She knew the technology couldn't be uninvented. So instead of completely destroying it, she built in safeguards. The biometric security was part of that, ensuring only she or your father could access the system. But there were other measures, too. The screen displayed a complex facility layout. The Kazakhstan site was a joint research center operated under an international treaty. When the program was officially shut down in 2004, all QED prototypes were supposed to be dismantled. Apparently, one wasn't. Jacob studied the facility blueprints. So we're going in to destroy it before the Russians get their hands on it? Not exactly, Agent Mercer interjected. The activation of the security protocol suggests the QED is already operating. Our first priority is to determine who reactivated it and why. Then, yes, we either secure or neutralize the technology. How did it get activated without my parents? Jacob asked. The three men exchanged glances before General Phillips answered. That's what concerns us most. The only possibility is that someone has found a way to circumvent or duplicate the genetic security measures. A cold feeling settled in Jacob's stomach. Or they have access to Parker DNA. The general nodded grimly. The timing of the activation, just days after your father's medical records were uploaded to the regional hospital system, suggests someone may have acquired a sample of his DNA. My father's never been to Kazakhstan, Jacob pointed out. No, but his DNA profile might have been transported there, Agent Harris explained. A blood sample, a hair follicle, anything containing genetic material could potentially be used with the right technology. Jacob sat back, his mind reeling with the implications. If someone had gone to such lengths to activate the QED, their intentions couldn't be benign. There's more, General Phillips said quietly. Before communications went dark, we received a fragment of data, a partial transmission indicating that whoever is in the facility now is attempting to modify the QED. To weaponize it, Jacob concluded. We believe so. And if they succeed... The general didn't need to finish the thought. Jacob looked again at his mother's photograph, feeling the weight of her legacy and the responsibility it now placed on his shoulders. So what's the plan? You drop me into this facility, I disable some security systems, and then what? I'm not exactly special forces material. You won't be alone, the general assured him. A team of specialists will accompany you. Your role is focused. Get us past the biometric security and help identify the key components of the QED that need to be secured or destroyed. And if whoever's in there objects to our plan, Agent Mercer smiled thinly. That's where my expertise comes in. For the next several hours, Jacob was briefed on the operation details. He studied the facility layouts until he could visualize every corridor and junction. Agent Harris taught him how to operate the specialized communications equipment he would carry, while Mercer provided basic tactical training. How to move, how to take cover, how to follow the team's commands in an emergency. As the hours passed and the jet cruised eastward, Jacob's initial shock gave way to a grim determination. The world his parents had tried to leave behind had found him anyway. Now all he could do was finish what they had started, ensure that Susan Parker's creation would never be used to harm the people she had sought to protect. Somewhere over the Atlantic, exhaustion finally claimed him. Jacob drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreams of wheat fields giving way to strange laboratories and the steady beep, beep, beep of machines he'd never seen, but somehow recognized, as if the knowledge had been encoded in his DNA alongside the genetic markers that had drawn him into this dangerous new world. Jacob awoke to Agent Harris shaking his shoulder. "We're approaching the staging area. Time to gear up." Outside the jet's window, a barren landscape stretched beneath them, mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth against the dawn sky. They had landed at a remote airstrip in a neighboring country, Jacob wasn't told which one, and transferred to a smaller, unmarked aircraft for the final leg of their journey. The plane touched down on what appeared to be an abandoned mining site. Several nondescript buildings and a handful of vehicles were the only signs of human presence in the otherwise desolate terrain. "Welcome to nowhere," Agent Mercer said as they disembarked, the chill mountain air slapping Jacob awake more effectively than any cup of coffee. They were led to the largest of the buildings, a corrugated metal structure that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. Inside, however, was a fully equipped operations center with advanced communications equipment, weapons racks, and digital displays showing satellite imagery of the region. 5 people looked up as they entered, 3 men and 2 women, all with the hard, watchful eyes of people accustomed to dangerous situations. One of them, a man with close-cropped gray hair and a scar running along his jaw, stepped forward. "Colonel Reeves," General Phillips greeted him. "Meet Jacob Parker." The colonel's piercing gaze assessed Jacob, clearly finding him wanting. "This is our golden ticket. He looks like he should be driving a tractor." "Until yesterday he was," Jacob replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. A flash of amusement crossed the colonel's face. "At least he's got some spine. Let's see if he's still standing after briefing." He turned to the others. "Team, meet Mr. Parker. His mother built the device we're after, and his DNA is our way past the security systems." The team members introduced themselves one by one. Major Elena Vasquez, Communications and Technology Specialist; Captain Ian Westfield, Tactical Operations; Lieutenant Kira Chen, Medical Officer; Sergeant Marcus Ortiz, Demolitions Expert; and Dr. David Conley, the only other civilian, a quantum physicist who had worked with Susan Parker in the early stages of the project. "Dr. Conley," Jacob said, recognizing the name, "my mother mentioned you in her research journals." The older man's eyebrows shot up. "She kept journals? I was never aware." "We'll discuss Susan Parker's legacy later," Colonel Reeves interrupted. "Right now, we have a facility to infiltrate and a potentially world-ending device to secure. Clock's ticking." The team gathered around a holographic display showing the research facility, a collection of bunker-like structures nestled in a mountain valley. Red indicators blinked at various points around the perimeter. "Latest satellite pass confirms Russian special forces have established positions here, here, and here," Reeves indicated. "They haven't breached the facility yet, which suggests they're facing the same biometric security challenges we are." "Or they're waiting for something," Major Vasquez suggested. "Additional equipment, perhaps, or orders from Moscow. Either way, their presence complicates our insertion," Captain Westfield added, pointing to a ravine on the eastern side of the facility. "This was our primary infiltration route, but Russian forces have it covered now." Colonel Reeves turned to Jacob. "Parker, how confident are you that your DNA will grant us access?" Jacob hesitated. "General Phillips believes it will work, but I've never tested it. My mother designed the system to recognize family genetic markers, but that doesn't mean it will accept me as easily as her or my father." "Great," Sergeant Ortiz muttered. "Our whole mission depends on a maybe." "Welcome to Special Operations," Lieutenant Chen replied dryly. "When has anything ever been certain?" Dr. Conley stepped forward, adjusting his glasses as he studied the facility layout. "Based on what I know of Susan's work, the main access point would be here." He indicated a seemingly unremarkable section of the facility's eastern wall. The biometric scanner would be disguised but accessible. That puts us directly in the Russians' line of sight, Westfield pointed out. Jacob studied the hologram, something about the layout tugging at his memory. What about here? He asked, pointing to the western face of the facility. This looks like a maintenance access point. Dr. Conley squinted at the area Jacob indicated. Possibly, but I don't recall any secondary entrance in the original designs. My father was responsible for the mechanical implementation, Jacob explained. He always built redundancies into his systems. I'd bet anything there's a service entrance, probably designed to look like part of the ventilation system. Colonel Reeves exchanged glances with General Phillips. Worth checking. Vasquez, pull up the thermal imaging from our last satellite pass. Major Vasquez tapped rapidly on her tablet, and the hologram shifted to show heat signatures across the facility. A faint line of elevated temperature ran along the western wall, exactly where Jacob had indicated. Well, I'll be damned, Westfield said. Looks like a maintenance tunnel. Good eye, Parker. Jacob felt a small surge of pride. Maybe he wasn't completely useless on this mission after all. This changes our approach, Colonel Reeves said, immediately recalculating. We'll insert here, under cover of darkness. 2 teams, Alpha team with Parker and Dr. Conley, goes for the QED. Bravo team creates a diversion on the east side to draw Russian attention. The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Jacob was fitted with tactical gear that felt foreign and restrictive compared to his worn jeans and flannel shirts. Lieutenant Chen gave him a crash course on the medical kit he would carry, while Sergeant Ortiz showed him how to use basic defensive equipment. Not giving you a weapon, Ortiz explained bluntly. More likely to shoot yourself or one of us than any bad guys. I wasn't expecting one, Jacob replied, relieved. The thought of carrying a gun made him more anxious than facing the unknown security systems. As the team prepared their equipment, Jacob found himself drawn to a table where various technical components were laid out, parts for communication devices, sensors, and other electronics he didn't recognize but somehow understood. Almost unconsciously, he picked up a malfunctioning radio that Vasquez had set aside. His fingers moved with intuitive precision, identifying the problem. A crossed wire and misaligned power coupling, and fixing it within minutes. How did you do that? Vasquez asked, watching him work. That unit's been giving me trouble for days. Jacob shrugged, unable to explain the intuitive understanding that guided his hands. Just saw what was wrong and fixed it. Dr. Conley, who had been observing quietly, nodded as if confirming something to himself. Susan used to do that. Just know how things fit together. Called it her mechanical intuition. Seems you inherited more than just her DNA. As evening approached, the team made final preparations. Colonel Reeves outlined the mission parameters one last time, his voice calm but authoritative. Our primary objective is to secure the QED and all related technology. Secondary objective is to identify whoever activated the device and determine their intentions. If the QED cannot be secured intact, we destroy it. Questions? Rules of engagement? Westfield asked. Non-lethal where possible. We want to avoid an international incident with the Russians. But if it comes down to the QED falling into unauthorized hands, or protecting your team, you are cleared to use necessary force. Jacob felt his heartbeat accelerating as the reality of the situation set in. In less than an hour, he would be infiltrating a secret facility, potentially engaging with Russian special forces, all to secure a device his mother had created decades ago. Dr. Conley seemed to sense his anxiety and moved closer. Your mother was a brilliant woman, Jacob. But more importantly, she was ethical. She understood the responsibility that came with knowledge. That's why she built in the safeguards, why she walked away when she realized how her work might be misused. I barely knew her, Jacob admitted quietly. She died when I was 18, and apparently everything I thought I knew about her life was a cover story. The physicist smiled sadly. Not everything. The woman who raised you, who taught you to understand how things work, who instilled in you that sense of right and wrong, that was the real Susan Parker. As darkness fell, the team loaded into 2 black helicopters with specially modified engines for silent approach. Jacob found himself seated between Dr. Conley and Lieutenant Chen, the vibration of the aircraft mingling with the adrenaline coursing through his veins to create a sensation of unreality. Through the open door of the helicopter, he watched the rugged landscape pass beneath them, the facility growing closer with each passing minute. The mission was real now, not just a briefing or a training exercise. 2 minutes to drop point, the pilot's voice came through their headsets. Colonel Reeves, seated across from Jacob, fixed him with an intense gaze. Remember your training. Stay close to your assigned team members. Follow orders instantly. No heroics. Jacob nodded, his mouth too dry for words. As the helicopter began its descent into a small clearing 2 kilometers from the facility, Jacob thought of his father back on the farm. William Parker had walked away from this world of secrets and danger to raise his son in peace. Now Jacob was diving headfirst into the very life his parents had sacrificed everything to leave behind. The helicopter touched down silently, its rotors barely disturbing the scrubby vegetation below. Go, 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 Reeves commanded, and the team began to disembark with practiced efficiency. Jacob took a deep breath and stepped out into the darkness, leaving behind the simple certainties of farm life and moving toward a destiny intertwined with his mother's legacy. The night air bit at Jacob's face as he followed the team across the rocky terrain. They moved in a disciplined formation that he struggled to maintain, his boots catching on unseen obstacles, despite the night vision goggles strapped to his head. The ghostly green landscape seemed alien and disorienting after a lifetime of navigating familiar farm fields. Parker, stay close, Major Vasquez whispered, her voice barely audible through his earpiece. She moved with cat-like grace, despite carrying what looked like 30 pounds of equipment. They reached a ridge overlooking the facility. Colonel Reeves signaled a halt, and the team dropped to their stomachs, using the rocky outcropping for cover. Jacob mimicked their movements, the unfamiliar weight of his tactical vest pressing uncomfortably against his chest. Captain Westfield raised a thermal scope, scanning the area below. I count 4 Russian operatives on the eastern perimeter, he reported. 2 more patrolling the north face. Colonel Reeves nodded, then turned to Jacob. Show us this maintenance entrance you're so confident about. Jacob surveyed the western wall of the facility, looking for patterns that might reveal his father's handiwork. The building seemed impregnable, a featureless concrete bunker embedded in the mountainside. But there was something about the ventilation system that caught his eye, a subtle asymmetry in the arrangement of what appeared to be exhaust vents. There, he pointed. See how the vents are spaced irregularly? All except those 3, they're exactly 4 meters apart. Dr. Conley adjusted his glasses, peering through his own scope. I don't see how that indicates an entrance. Jacob struggled to articulate the intuitive understanding that had formed in his mind. It's like a signature. My dad always said true symmetry doesn't exist in nature, so perfect spacing stands out. He uses it as a marker. Sergeant Ortiz snorted skeptically, but Colonel Reeves studied the area with renewed interest. Worth investigating. Bravo team, prepare for diversion on my mark. Alpha team, we move to the western face using the drainage culvert. For cover, they descended the ridge carefully, using the natural contours of the land to mask their approach. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The facility loomed larger as they approached, its dark bulk silhouetted against the star-filled sky. A sharp crackle came through their comms, followed by Lieutenant Chen's voice from Bravo team. Russian patrol approaching your position from the north. 60 seconds. Cover, Colonel Reeves commanded, and Alpha team immediately scattered, pressing themselves into the shadows of large boulders and scrubby vegetation. Jacob froze behind a rocky outcropping, barely daring to breathe as the sound of boots on gravel reached his ears. 2 Russian soldiers passed within meters of his position, their conversation a low murmur in a language he couldn't understand. He caught a glimpse of their faces in the moonlight, young men not much older than himself, their expressions alert but relaxed, unaware of the intruders hiding mere feet away. When they had passed, the team regrouped and continued toward the facility with added caution. They reached the western wall without further incident, positioning themselves directly beneath the ventilation shafts Jacob had identified. "Now what, farm boy?" Sergeant Ortiz whispered. Jacob studied the vents, trying to think like his father. William Parker always built his systems with practicality in mind, maintenance access that wouldn't require specialized tools or equipment. The middle vent, Jacob decided. It should have a hidden release mechanism. He approached the wall, running his fingers along the cold metal of the vent cover. There, a slight indentation where the frame met the concrete, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. Jacob pressed firmly, feeling a subtle click beneath his fingertips. Nothing happened. Ortiz made a disgusted sound. "So much for—" "Wait," Jacob interrupted, his mind racing. His father's systems often had redundancies. "It needs a sequence. 3 points of pressure like—" He reached up, finding similar indentations at the top corners of the vent frame. Pressing all 3 simultaneously, he was rewarded with a soft hydraulic hiss. The vent cover recessed slightly, then slid sideways into the wall, revealing a dark passage beyond. "I'll be damned," Vasquez murmured. "Nicely done, Parker," Colonel Reeves acknowledged, gesturing for Ortiz to take point. "Let's move before someone notices." The passage was narrow and pitched downward at a steep angle, forcing them to proceed in single file. Jacob followed behind Dr. Conley, trying not to think about the thousands of tons of concrete and earth pressing down around them. The air grew cooler and stale as they descended, their way lit only by the eerie green glow of their night vision equipment. After what seemed like an eternity, the passage leveled out and widened into a small maintenance room filled with pipes, electrical panels, and environmental control systems. Vasquez immediately moved to a control panel, connecting a handheld device to interface with the facility's systems. "Security grid is active," she reported after a moment. "Motion sensors, thermal detection, the works, but they're running on a closed network. I can't access the main systems from here." Colonel Reeves turned to Jacob and Dr. Conley. "Where would the primary biometric access point be located?" Dr. Conley studied the room, his academic demeanor giving way to growing excitement. "This is remarkable. The facility design is exactly as the original blueprints indicated. The main laboratory should be 2 levels down, with security checkpoints at each juncture." "Great," Ortiz muttered. "So we have to get through multiple security systems." Jacob had been examining the maintenance room, noting the careful organization of the equipment. Everything was meticulously labeled, not with standard industrial markings, but with a custom notation system he recognized instantly. "This is my mom's labeling scheme," he said softly, running his fingers over the engraved symbols. "She developed it for her lab work. Dad always teased her about it, but he used it in all their joint projects." Following the labeled conduits with his eyes, Jacob traced the flow of power and data through the facility's infrastructure. One particular bundle of cables caught his attention, thicker than the others, with additional shielding and a distinctive marking he remembered from the schematic briefing. "These lead to the QED," he said, pointing to the cables. "And they bypass the regular security grid." Dr. Conley looked skeptical. "Susan would never leave an unsecured access route." "Not unsecured," Jacob corrected. "Just differently secured." He followed the cables to where they disappeared into a maintenance tunnel barely large enough to crawl through. I think there's a service entrance to the lab, for emergencies or maintenance when normal access isn't available. Vasquez consulted her tablet. Makes sense. If the main power went down, they'd need a way to reach the device without going through electronically controlled security doors. Colonel Reeves made a quick decision. Ortiz, stay here and maintain our exit route. The rest of Alpha Team follows Parker. Bravo Team, execute diversion in 5 minutes. The maintenance tunnel was claustrophobically tight, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Jacob led the way, following the thick bundle of cables by touch more than sight. After 30 meters, the tunnel ended at a small hatch. Unlike the electronic security systems protecting the main entrances, this hatch featured an old-fashioned mechanical lock, complex but not digital. This is where we'll need your DNA, Dr. Conley explained, pointing to a small, almost invisible panel beside the lock. It appears to be dormant now, but once engaged, it will scan for genetic markers. Jacob hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what they were doing. This facility, this technology, it was his mother's legacy, her life's work, hidden away and potentially corrupted for purposes she would have abhorred. How do I activate it? He asked. Dr. Conley reached past him, pressing a recessed button alongside the panel. The panel illuminated with a soft blue light, revealing what looked like a simple glass plate. Palm print and DNA analyzer combined, the physicist explained. Your fingerprints won't match your parents', but your genetic material should register as a close enough match to pass the security protocols. Jacob placed his hand against the cool glass, feeling a slight tingle as the scanner activated. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, with a soft chime, the panel glowed green, and the mechanical lock disengaged with a series of clicks. I'm in, Jacob breathed, a strange mixture of pride and unease washing over him. Before they could open the hatch, their comms crackled to life with Lieutenant Chen's urgent voice. Bravo Team engaging. Multiple Russian forces responding to eastern perimeter. Almost simultaneously, Ortiz reported from his position. We've got company in the maintenance room. 2 hostiles investigating the tunnel entrance. Colonel Reeves's expression hardened. Vasquez, with me. We'll deal with our visitors. Parker, Conley. Proceed to the lab and locate the QED. Do not attempt to deactivate anything until we rejoin you. Jacob swallowed hard as Reeves and Vasquez retreated back down the tunnel, leaving him alone with the elderly physicist. Ready? Dr. Conley asked, his academic demeanor betrayed by the slight tremor in his voice. Jacob took a deep breath and turned the hatch handle. It rotated smoothly, the heavy door swinging open with surprising ease. Beyond lay a dimly lit chamber filled with humming equipment and blinking lights, the heart of Operation Nightingale and the culmination of his mother's genius. As he stepped through the hatch, a soft automated voice spoke from hidden speakers. Welcome, Parker family member. Secondary protocols engaged. The room came fully to life, illuminating the central platform where a device no larger than a microwave oven pulsed with a strange, shimmering energy. The quantum extraction device, his mother's greatest creation, and potentially the world's most dangerous weapon, was active and operational. But it wasn't the device that made Jacob freeze in his tracks. It was the person standing beside it, monitoring its output with calm efficiency. Hello, Jacob, said the woman, turning to face him with a smile that he'd seen thousands of times in photographs, but never expected to see in person again. I've been waiting for you. Dr. Conley gasped beside him, his face draining of color. Susan? That's impossible. Jacob could barely form words, his reality shattering around him. Mom? Jacob stared at the woman who wore his mother's face, his mind reeling with disbelief. Susan Parker, or someone who looked remarkably like her, stood calmly before them, dressed in a white lab coat, her dark hair streaked with more gray than in the photographs he cherished, but unmistakably her. "This isn't possible," Jacob whispered. "You died. We buried you." The woman's smile faltered slightly. "The situation is complicated, Jacob. But I assure you I am Susan Parker." She turned to Dr. Conley, whose shock seemed even more profound than Jacob's. "Hello, David. It's been a long time." Dr. Conley took a faltering step forward. "Susan, how? We were told you died of cancer 5 years ago." "Cancer was the cover story," she replied, her attention returning to Jacob. "I'm so sorry for the deception, Jacob. Leaving you and your father was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was necessary to protect you both." Jacob felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. The grief he'd processed, the memories of his mother's funeral, the years of watching his father mourn her, all of it challenged by the living, breathing woman before him. "Protect us from what?" he demanded, anger beginning to replace his shock. Susan gestured toward the QED. "From this. From what certain people wanted to do with my creation." Her expression hardened. "When I realized the true intentions behind Operation Nightingale, I knew I had to disappear, make them believe I was no longer a factor. So you faked your death. Let Dad and me believe you were gone forever." Jacob's voice cracked with emotion. "He's been sick, Mom. Getting worse every year since you died. Did you know that?" Pain flashed across Susan's face. "I've been monitoring from a distance. There are medical treatments being prepared for him. Part of the agreement for your assistance on this mission." Dr. Conley, recovering his scientific composure, approached the QED with professional curiosity. "Susan, who authorized the reactivation of this device? General Phillips told us the facility went dark. Security protocols were triggered." "I triggered them," Susan admitted, "when I detected unauthorized access attempts. Someone was trying to breach the facility using genetic material they somehow obtained, likely your father's medical samples." "The Russians?" Jacob asked. Susan shook her head. "Not the Russians. They're just opportunists who detected unusual energy signatures from the facility. No, this was someone with inside knowledge of Nightingale." She fixed Dr. Conley with a pointed look. "Someone who worked on the original project." Dr. Conley paled visibly. "You can't think I had anything to do with—" "Not you specifically, David," Susan interrupted gently. "But someone from our original team. Someone who never accepted the decision to shut down the project." A sudden burst of static came through Jacob's earpiece, followed by Colonel Reeves's tense voice. "Parker, report. What's your status?" Jacob hesitated, looking at his mother. Susan nodded slightly, understanding the question in his eyes. "Colonel, this is Parker," he responded, his voice steadier than he felt. "We've located the QED, and you're not going to believe this, but my mother is here." A long pause followed, before Reeves replied, his voice tight with suspicion. "Parker, confirm. Are you saying Susan Parker is alive and present at the facility?" "Affirmative," Jacob answered. "She says she triggered the security protocols when someone tried to access the facility using my father's DNA." "Tell them to be careful," Susan interjected urgently. "The facility is compromised. There are others inside besides the Russians." Jacob relayed this information, adding, "She says whoever is trying to access the QED has inside knowledge of the project." "Hold position," Colonel Reeves ordered. "We've neutralized the immediate threat and are moving to your location. Do not, repeat, do not allow anyone to access the device until we arrive." As Jacob acknowledged the order, Susan moved to a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Displays around the lab lit up, showing security camera feeds from throughout the facility. "There," she pointed to one of the screens showing a corridor 2 levels below them. "That's not Russian special forces." The camera showed 3 figures in unmarked tactical gear, moving with practiced efficiency through the facility. Unlike the Russians they had observed earlier, these operatives moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. "How did they get in?" Dr. Conley asked, adjusting his glasses as he peered at the screen. The same way you did, Susan replied grimly, with Parker DNA. But not Jacob's. A cold realization washed over Jacob. Dad? They have Dad? Susan shook her head. William is safe. I've been monitoring him remotely since you left the farm. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. Jacob, there's something you need to understand about our family. Something your father and I decided long ago not to burden you with. Before she could continue, one of the security monitors flashed a warning. The unknown operatives had reached a security checkpoint and were attempting to bypass it. They're trying to access the main lab, Susan said, her hands moving quickly over the controls. I can lock down the facility, but it won't hold them for long. Mom, Jacob pressed, what were you about to tell me about our family? Susan turned to face him, her expression a mixture of determination and regret. The Parker genetic markers are unique, Jacob. They were made to be unique. Made? Jacob repeated, confusion evident in his voice. Dr. Conley's eyes widened with understanding. The enhancement protocols, he breathed. You actually implemented them. Susan nodded, her attention split between her son and the security monitors. Early in the project, we discovered that certain genetic modifications could enhance human cognitive function, particularly in areas related to mechanical intuition and pattern recognition. The kind of intuition that lets you look at a complex system and instinctively understand how it works. You're saying you genetically modified yourself? Jacob asked incredulously. Not just myself, Susan replied softly. The modifications are hereditary, Jacob. They're part of you too. The implications crashed over Jacob like a wave. His mechanical aptitude, his ability to understand and fix complex systems without formal training. They weren't just natural talents or learned skills. They were engineered traits, designed and implemented before he was even born. Does Dad know? He managed to ask. Of course, Susan confirmed. William was enhanced as well, though differently. His modifications focused on mechanical implementation rather than theoretical understanding. Together, we could conceptualize and build systems that were decades ahead of their time. The QED, Dr. Conley murmured. That's how you made such rapid progress. We all thought you were just brilliant, but you were still brilliant, Susan corrected with a flash of pride. The enhancements amplify existing capabilities. They don't create them from nothing. The security monitor beeped again, more urgently this time. The unknown operatives had breached another level of security and were now just one floor below them. Who are they, Mom? Jacob demanded. And how do they have Parker DNA if it's not from me or Dad? Susan's expression darkened. Because they have your sister. Jacob felt as if he'd been struck. What? I don't have a sister. You do, Susan said, her voice tight with emotion. Your twin sister, Emma. She was taken from us shortly after birth. Supposedly died of complications. But I never believed it. I kept searching, and eventually I found evidence that she had been secretly kept within the program, raised to continue the work if your father and I ever became uncooperative. This is insane, Jacob whispered, struggling to process this new revelation. The lab door slid open, revealing Colonel Reeves, Major Vasquez, and a visibly injured Sergeant Ortiz. They entered cautiously, weapons ready, their expressions shifting from alert tension to shock as they saw Susan. Dr. Parker, Colonel Reeves acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral, you have a lot of explaining to do. Later, Susan replied briskly. Right now we need to secure the QED and evacuate. The people coming for it aren't just trying to steal it. They want to weaponize it in ways even the military hasn't conceived of. And the Russians? Vasquez asked, helping Ortiz to a chair where Lieutenant Chen, who had just arrived with the rest of Bravo team, began treating his wounds. A complication, but not our primary concern, Susan responded. "The real threat is already inside the facility, and they're being led by someone with Parker DNA. Someone who can bypass all the security measures I put in place." Colonel Reeves assessed the situation quickly, his military training taking precedence over his shock at finding Susan Parker alive. "How much time do we have?" Susan checked the monitors. "Minutes at most. They've reached the final security checkpoint." "Then we need to move now," Reeves decided. "Dr. Parker, how do we shut down the QED safely?" Susan shook her head. "We don't. The QED is too valuable to destroy and too dangerous to leave behind. We need to take it with us." "Take it?" Dr. Conley sputtered. "The power requirements alone are handled by the device itself," Susan finished for him. "It's self-sustaining now, David. That's what I've been working on all these years in secret, making it truly portable." Jacob looked at the device that had altered the course of so many lives. His parents, his own, and apparently a sister he never knew existed. The QED hummed quietly on its platform, a testament to his mother's genius and the heavy burden of knowledge. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to know. Is my sister, is Emma, is she doing this willingly, or is she being used?" Susan's eyes met his, filled with a mother's anguish. "I don't know, Jacob. That's what I've been trying to discover by reactivating the facility. To draw them out, to find Emma, to see if she can be saved." "Using us as bait," Colonel Reeves observed coldly. "Using myself as bait," Susan corrected. "I never expected Jacob to be brought into this. That was not part of my plan." A final warning blared from the security system. The intruders had reached the last door separating them from the lab. "Time's up," Vasquez announced, readying her weapon. "Jacob," Susan said urgently, taking his hands in hers. "Whatever happens next, remember that everything your father and I did was to protect you and to find your sister." Before Jacob could respond, the laboratory doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Standing in the doorway was a young woman whose face was so hauntingly familiar that Jacob felt his heart stop for a moment. It was like looking in a mirror, if that mirror could show him as a woman, with longer hair and colder eyes. "Hello, Mother," the woman said, her voice chillingly similar to Susan's own. "I see you finally met my brother." The room froze in a tableau of shock and tension. Jacob stared at his sister, his twin, her existence a revelation that rewrote his entire understanding of his family. Emma's hair was darker than his, her face slightly sharper, but the resemblance was undeniable. Behind Emma stood two men in tactical gear, their weapons trained on the group. They moved with the practiced precision of veteran operatives, taking up positions that gave them clear sightlines across the laboratory. Colonel Reeves and his team had immediately raised their own weapons in response, creating a standoff that crackled with lethal potential. "Emma," Susan breathed, taking a half-step forward before stopping herself. "I've been looking for you for so long." A cold smile flickered across Emma's face. How touching. The devoted mother, searching for her lost child. Her gaze shifted to Jacob. "And you must be my brother. The lucky one who got to grow up on a farm with Mommy and Daddy, while I was raised in laboratories and training facilities." Jacob found his voice, though it sounded foreign to his own ears. "I didn't know you existed until 5 minutes ago." "Of course you didn't," Emma replied, her tone softening slightly. "They wouldn't have told you, just like they didn't tell you about your enhanced genetics or mother's fake death or any of the other family secrets." She took a step into the room, her movements fluid and confident. "Our parents are very good at keeping secrets, aren't they?" "That's enough," Colonel Reeves interrupted, his weapon never wavering. "Dr. Parker, Emma, you and your men are outnumbered. Whatever you're planning, it ends now." Emma raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Is that what you think, Colonel? That I'm outnumbered?" She glanced at her watch. The Russians have engaged your extraction team at the landing site. Your escape route is compromised, and in approximately 3 minutes, this facility's self-destruct sequence will activate. Her eyes locked with Susan's. Unless Mother deactivates it with her access code. Susan's face paled. You've accessed the self-destruct system? How? I had a good teacher, Emma replied enigmatically. Or rather, his research. Dr. Kelvin was quite thorough in his documentation before his unfortunate accident. Dr. Conley gasped. Alexander Kelvin? He died in a car crash 2 years after the project was shut down. Did he? Emma asked with a knowing smile. Or was he silenced because he wanted to continue the work when everyone else lost their nerve? Susan's expression hardened. Alex became dangerous. He wanted to weaponize the QED to use our genetic enhancements as a template for creating super soldiers. The project was shut down for good reason. The project was shut down because weak people couldn't handle its implications, Emma retorted. Her gaze swept across the QED, a mixture of reverence and ambition in her eyes. Do you have any idea what this technology is truly capable of? The quantum field can be focused, directed, not just as a weapon, but as a means of human advancement. Jacob watched the exchange, struggling to process this new reality. The sister he never knew existed, raised by people who clearly had molded her into something both brilliant and dangerous. Yet beneath her cold exterior, he sensed something familiar, the same intuitive understanding of systems and patterns that he possessed. You planning to monologue all day? Or are we getting to the part where you tell us what you want? Sergeant Ortiz interrupted from where Lieutenant Chen was treating his wound. Emma smiled, apparently amused by his directness. What I want is simple. I'm taking the QED. Mother is coming with me to continue her work. The rest of you, she shrugged. Well, that depends on how cooperative you are. And my brother? Susan asked, her voice steady despite the tension. Emma's eyes shifted to Jacob, studying him with clinical interest. He comes too. His genetic pattern matches mine. He could be useful. I'm not going anywhere with you, Jacob stated firmly, and neither is our mother. Your loyalty is admirable if misplaced, Emma replied. You don't even know her, Jacob. Not really. The woman who raised you was playing a role, living a lie. The real Susan Parker is a scientific visionary who was forced to abandon her life's work and one of her children because of political pressure and moral cowardice. That's not true, Susan interjected. I left because what they wanted to do with my research was wrong. They took you from me, told me you had died. By the time I discovered the truth, you had been hidden away, integrated into their program. Emma's composure cracked slightly, a flicker of old pain crossing her features. A convenient story, but it doesn't change the fact that you chose him. She nodded toward Jacob. Over your research, over me. Colonel Reeves, ever the tactician, had been assessing the situation while the family drama unfolded. Major Vasquez, he said quietly, verify the status of our extraction team. Vasquez touched her earpiece, attempting to establish contact. After a moment, she shook her head slightly. No response, sir. Emma smiled. As I said, your exit strategy has been compromised. Now, we have approximately 2 minutes before this facility begins its self-destruct sequence. Mother, the deactivation code, please. Susan remained defiant. Even if I give you what you want, what then? You weaponize the QED? Use it to hold entire cities hostage? That's not what I designed it for. No, Emma agreed. You designed it as a clean energy source. But technology doesn't have inherent morality, Mother. Its purpose is determined by those with the vision to wield it. She gestured to the men behind her. Secure the device. As the operatives moved toward the QED, Colonel Reeves gave a subtle hand signal. His team responded instantly, creating a defensive formation between the intruders and the device. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed, Reeves stated. "We can all walk out of here together." Emma's expression hardened. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Your choice, Mother. The code, or we all die here. Jacob studied his sister's face, searching for some sign of bluff or deception. He saw none, only absolute conviction and a willingness to follow through on her threat. "Jacob," Susan said suddenly, never taking her eyes off Emma. "The sequence to shut down the QED safely. Remember when you would help me in the garden? The pattern we used for planting." At first confused by this apparent non sequitur, Jacob suddenly understood. His mother was giving him instructions in code, referring to a memory only he would understand. As a child, he had helped her plant vegetables in a specific numerical pattern, Fibonacci sequence, she had called it. Moving slowly so as not to draw attention, Jacob edged closer to the QED. Emma was focused on Susan, the countdown to destruction ticking away in her mind. "Mom," Jacob said carefully, "if you give her the code, what guarantee do we have that she'll deactivate the self-destruct?" "None," Susan admitted. "But if she doesn't, we lose everything, including the chance to save Emma." Emma laughed sharply. "Save me? From what? I'm not the one who needs saving." Susan finally stepped forward, maternal concern overriding caution. "Yes, you are. Whatever they told you, however they raised you, it wasn't the life your father and I wanted for you." "The life you wanted," Emma repeated, her voice suddenly small, a glimpse of the child she had once been breaking through her hardened exterior. For a brief moment, Jacob saw vulnerability in his sister's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. 1 minute remaining. Your decision, Mother." Susan closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. 847503916, she recited, each digit clear and precise. Emma immediately relayed the code through her communication device. After a tense moment, she nodded. Self-destruct deactivated. She gestured to the QED. "Now, secure the device." As her operatives moved forward again, Jacob caught his mother's subtle nod. Following her earlier coded instructions, he quickly located the control panel on the side of the QED and input the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. The QED emitted a high-pitched whine, its pulsing energy field intensifying for a moment before collapsing inward with a flash of blue light. The device didn't shut down entirely, but entered what appeared to be a dormant state. "What did you do?" Emma demanded, alarm replacing her confidence. "Safe transport mode," Susan explained calmly. "The QED can now be moved without risk of destabilization." "Isn't that what you wanted?" Emma studied her mother suspiciously, clearly wondering what else might have been done to the device. Before she could question further, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "Perimeter breach," one of Emma's operatives reported. "Multiple hostiles entering from the East Wing. Russian Special Forces." Emma's eyes narrowed. "It seems our window is closing. We're leaving now." She gestured with her weapon. "Mother, Jacob, you're coming with us. The rest stay here to greet our Russian friends." "Not happening," Colonel Reeves stated flatly. The standoff intensified, neither side willing to back down, when suddenly the lights flickered and died, plunging the laboratory into darkness. Emergency lighting activated seconds later, casting long shadows across the tense faces. In that moment of confusion, Jacob felt a hand grip his arm, familiar and yet not. Emma's voice whispered in his ear, so low only he could hear, "Trust no one, not even her." Then gunfire erupted in the corridor outside and all hell broke loose. Chaos erupted in the laboratory. The sound of gunfire from the corridor spurred everyone into action. Colonel Reeves shouted orders as his team took defensive positions, Vasquez and Ortiz moving to secure the main entrance, while Lieutenant Chen pulled Dr. Conley behind a reinforced workstation for cover. In the confusion, Emma's operatives seized the opportunity to grab the dormant QED. Jacob lunged forward instinctively to stop them, but Emma blocked his path, her eyes locked with his. "You have a choice to make, brother," she said, her voice somehow cutting through the din of shouting and gunfire. "Right now." Susan appeared at Jacob's side, reaching for him. "Jacob, stay with me. Whatever she's told you—" "Told him?" Emma laughed bitterly. "I've told him nothing compared to the lifetime of lies you fed him." A deafening explosion rocked the corridor outside, close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. The Russians were breaching the laboratory's outer defenses. "We're out of time," Emma hissed. She pulled a small device from her pocket, a handheld tablet displaying what appeared to be facility schematics. "There's another way out, a maintenance tunnel your father built that doesn't appear on the official blueprints. We can reach it through the environmental control room." Jacob hesitated, Emma's earlier warning echoing in his mind. Trust no one. Not even her. But which her had she meant? His sister or his mother? Susan clutched Jacob's arm. "She's right about the tunnel. But Jacob, please—" Another explosion, closer this time, cut off her words. Colonel Reeves shouted from his position near the door, "We need to move now. This position is compromised." In the split second Jacob took to glance toward Reeves, Emma made her decision. She gestured sharply to her operatives, who had secured the QED on a portable platform. One of them threw something across the room, a small canister that hit the floor and immediately began spewing dense, white smoke. "Gas!" Vasquez shouted, but it wasn't toxic, just a smoke screen, filling the laboratory with impenetrable fog. Jacob felt his mother's grip torn from his arm. Disoriented in the thickening smoke, he heard Emma's voice close to his ear again. "Last chance, Jacob. With me or with her." Without conscious thought, Jacob found himself responding to the urgency in his sister's voice. He grasped her outstretched hand, allowing her to guide him through the smoke-filled room. They moved quickly, following one of Emma's operatives who carried the QED. Behind them, Jacob could hear shouting as Colonel Reeves attempted to regroup his scattered team. "Mom!" Jacob called back through the smoke, sudden fear gripping him. "Mom!" "She'll follow," Emma assured him, her grip on his hand unrelenting as she pulled him through a side door he hadn't noticed before. "She wants the QED too badly to let it go." They emerged into a narrow utility corridor, the smoke from the laboratory billowing out behind them. Emma's operative sealed the door, buying them precious time. "This way," Emma directed, consulting her tablet. "The environmental control room is through here." Jacob followed, his mind racing. What was he doing? He had just abandoned his mother and the team sent to help him, choosing instead to follow a sister he'd known existed for less than an hour. A sister who, by all appearances, was working against everything his parents had believed in. Yet something in Emma's warning had resonated with him. A sense that there were even deeper layers to this deception than he'd uncovered so far. They reached the environmental control room, a cramped space filled with humming equipment that regulated the facility's atmosphere. Emma immediately moved to a section of wall paneling that looked identical to all the others. "Help me with this," she instructed Jacob. "It needs Parker DNA to unlock, and I'm not taking chances with mine alone." Jacob hesitated. "Where does this tunnel lead? And why should I trust you?" Emma's eyes, so like his own, met his with unexpected vulnerability. "You shouldn't trust me, not completely. But right now, I'm your best chance of understanding what's really happening." She nodded toward the QED. "And of keeping that out of the wrong hands, all of the wrong hands." Something in her emphasis made Jacob's skin prickle with unease. He placed his palm beside hers on the wall panel, feeling a now familiar tingle as the scanner read his genetic signature. The panel slid aside, revealing a dark passage beyond. "After you," Emma said, gesturing to the tunnel. Jacob stood his ground. "Not until you tell me what you meant back there. Trust no one, not even her." Were you talking about Mom? Emma checked her tablet, her expression tightening. Movement in the main corridor. Russians have engaged Reeves's team. She looked up at Jacob. We have maybe 2 minutes before someone finds this room. Then start talking, Jacob insisted. Emma stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, respecting his resolve. The woman you call your mother is Susan Parker. Biologically, genetically, she is our mother. But the Susan Parker who created the QED, who revolutionized quantum physics, who helped develop our genetic enhancements, that woman wouldn't have abandoned her life's work. She wouldn't have walked away from the implications of what she'd created. She did it to protect us, Jacob argued, to keep her work from being weaponized. Emma shook her head. That's what she told you. What she perhaps believes herself now. But the truth is more complicated. She moved closer, her voice dropping. The original QED was destroyed, Jacob. What's in that case is a reconstruction built from incomplete data and flawed assumptions. Jacob glanced at the dormant device. If that's true, why do you want it so badly? Because it's still dangerous, Emma replied. In its current state, it's unstable. If activated improperly, the quantum field could expand beyond containment. The results would be catastrophic. The operative guarding the door tensed suddenly, raising his weapon. Someone's coming. Emma grabbed Jacob's arm, pulling him toward the tunnel entrance. We need to move. Now. This time, Jacob didn't resist. They entered the dark passage, Emma's operative following with the QED. The wall panel slid closed behind them, sealing them in darkness until Emma activated a tactical flashlight. The tunnel was narrow but tall enough to stand in, sloping gently downward. The walls were smooth concrete, the floor marked with subtle tracks for moving equipment. Dad's work, Jacob noted, recognizing his father's practical design elements. Emma nodded. William Parker was nothing if not thorough. He built this as an emergency evacuation route for the QED in case the facility was ever compromised. They moved quickly, the beam of Emma's flashlight illuminating their path. Jacob's thoughts raced as fast as his feet. If Emma was telling the truth, then the QED they carried was not only incomplete but potentially catastrophic. But if she was lying... Where are we going? He asked as they descended deeper into the mountain. There's a secondary facility, Emma explained. A backup site built when the project was at its peak. Only a handful of people know about it. Including you. Including me, she confirmed. I've spent years gathering information, Jacob, piecing together the fragments of our parents' work and their deception. The tunnel began to level out, eventually opening into a larger chamber that appeared to be a vehicle bay. A rugged all-terrain vehicle waited there, dusty but operational. Your exit strategy, Jacob observed. Emma nodded to her operative, who began loading the QED into the vehicle's rear compartment. I told you I was prepared. A distant sound echoed down the tunnel behind them. Voices, footsteps. They've found the access point, Emma said, checking her weapon. We need to leave. Jacob didn't move toward the vehicle. Not until you tell me everything. What happened all those years ago? Why did Mom really leave the project? Emma's expression softened slightly, perhaps the first genuine emotion Jacob had seen from her. Because she made a mistake, Jacob. A mistake that cost lives. The original QED test went catastrophically wrong. 3 scientists died, and the quantum field effects... She shook her head. The genetic modifications we carry were meant to protect us from those effects. Mom and Dad were the first test subjects, then us, in utero. That's why she walked away, Jacob realized. Not just because of how the military wanted to use it, but because it was dangerous. Yes, Emma agreed. But she didn't destroy all her research. She couldn't bring herself to erase everything she'd built. So she hid key components, split up critical data. Some she encoded in her own DNA, in our DNA. The sounds from the tunnel grew louder. Emma's operative called urgently from the vehicle. "Ma'am, we need to move." Emma held out her hand to Jacob. "Come with me. Help me finish what our parents started, the right way. Not as a weapon, but not buried and forgotten either. The QED could still change the world for the better." Jacob stood at the precipice of decision, torn between the mother he thought he knew and the sister he was just beginning to understand. Behind him lay the familiar, the team sent by his government, his mother who had returned from the dead. Ahead was uncertainty, Emma's claims, her agenda, her version of the truth. The footsteps in the tunnel grew closer. "Jacob," Emma urged, her hand still extended. "Trust your instincts. Isn't that what Dad always taught you?" It was, and right now Jacob's instincts were screaming that there was truth in what Emma had told him. Not the whole truth, perhaps, but enough to warrant following this path to its end. He took her hand. The all-terrain vehicle roared through the underground tunnel, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jacob gripped his seat as Emma navigated the rough passage with practiced skill, the QED secured in a specialized compartment behind them. Her operative sat in the back, weapon ready, watching for pursuit. "Where exactly are we going?" Jacob shouted over the engine noise. 20 kilometers east, Emma replied, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The secondary facility was built inside an abandoned Soviet-era bunker, off all official records. The tunnel began to slope upward, and soon they emerged through a camouflaged doorway into the harsh daylight. They were on a remote mountainside, far from the main facility, with no signs of civilization visible in any direction. Emma immediately accelerated across the rugged terrain, following what appeared to be a game trail, winding between sparse, wind-twisted trees. Jacob twisted in his seat, looking behind them. "No signs of pursuit yet." "They'll come," Emma said grimly. "Mother won't give up the QED easily, and Colonel Reeves has orders to secure it at any cost." "And the Russians?" "Wild card. They detected the energy signature but don't fully understand what they're chasing." Emma navigated around a boulder, the vehicle bouncing violently. "They just know it's powerful, and that's enough." As they drove, Jacob studied his sister's profile. So familiar, yet strange. The same genetic blueprint that had created him, yet shaped by entirely different experiences. "How did you find out?" he finally asked. "About me? About Mom still being alive?" Emma's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I was 16 when I first discovered I had a brother. I overheard my handlers discussing the other Parker child. They thought I was sedated after a testing session." "Testing?" Jacob echoed. "Regular evaluations of my cognitive functions and problem-solving abilities, particularly my mechanical intuition." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Jacob caught the underlying bitterness. "I spent most of my childhood being assessed, enhanced, trained." Jacob tried to imagine it, growing up in laboratories instead of open fields, surrounded by scientists instead of his father's warm presence. "After that, I started looking for information about you," Emma continued. "It wasn't easy. They kept me isolated, limited my access to outside data, but the genetic modifications give us certain advantages. Like understanding complex systems," Jacob noted. Emma nodded. "Including security systems. I learned to exploit weaknesses, gather intelligence. By the time I was 20, I had compiled enough data to know that William Parker was raising his son, my brother, on a farm in the American Midwest, while my mother was supposedly dead of cancer." "But she wasn't dead," Jacob prompted. "No. 2 years ago, I identified anomalies in research being conducted at a private facility in Switzerland. The methodologies, the unique approaches to quantum mechanics, it had Susan Parker written all over it. She was using a different name, but I knew it was her." The vehicle crested a ridge, revealing a vast valley below. Emma pointed to a distant cluster of concrete structures, half buried in the hillside opposite. "There, the secondary facility." She guided their vehicle down the slope, following a barely visible path. As they descended, Jacob processed what he'd learned. If you've known about Mom being alive for 2 years, why wait until now to make your move? Emma's expression darkened. I wasn't ready. I needed to fully understand the QED's capabilities and risks, and, she hesitated, I needed to be sure of who I could trust. And now? Now circumstances forced my hand. When Mother reactivated the primary facility, it triggered alerts in multiple intelligence agencies. I had to move before someone else secured the QED. They reached the valley floor, the vehicle bouncing across a dry riverbed. Behind them, a faint sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the mountains. Company, Emma's operative announced, checking a handheld scanner. 2 aircraft approaching from the north, military grade. Emma accelerated, pushing the vehicle to its limits across the rough terrain. Almost there. Jacob held on as they sped toward the concrete bunker complex. Emma, whatever happens next, I need to know. What's your real plan for the QED? She glanced at him, then back to the path ahead. The truth? To neutralize it, permanently. Destroy it? Not exactly. The quantum field can't simply be destroyed. It would cause a cascading reaction. But it can be stabilized, rendered inert. Jacob frowned. If all you want to do is neutralize it, why didn't you join forces with Mom? Or with Reeves? Emma's laugh was sharp. Because neither of them wants it neutralized, Jacob. Mother wants to preserve her legacy, a working QED that she controls. And the military? They still dream of weaponizing it despite the risks. And I should believe you because I've lived with the consequences of the quantum field exposure my entire life, Emma replied, her voice suddenly vulnerable. The genetic modifications don't just enhance cognitive function. They change you in other ways, ways that become more pronounced with prolonged exposure to the field. Jacob felt a chill of apprehension. What kinds of ways? Before Emma could answer, the operative shouted a warning. A helicopter appeared over the ridge behind them, closing fast. Through the aircraft's open door, Jacob could see armed figures preparing to rappel down. Go, Emma shouted, swerving the vehicle toward the bunker entrance. We need to get inside. They skidded to a stop before a massive steel door embedded in concrete. Emma leaped out, rushing to a concealed panel. Jacob, I need your DNA again. Jacob joined her at the panel, placing his hand beside hers on the scanner. The massive door began to rumble open, revealing a dark passage beyond. Get the QED inside, Emma ordered her operative, who immediately began unloading the device from the vehicle. The helicopter was directly overhead now, the downdraft whipping dust and debris around them. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Emma Parker, stand down and surrender the device immediately. Jacob recognized Colonel Reeves's voice. Looking up, he saw figures fast roping from the helicopter, Vasquez, Ortiz, and others from the team. Inside now, Emma shouted, drawing her weapon. She fired several shots, not at the descending operatives, but at the helicopter's searchlight, shattering it. Jacob helped the operative maneuver the QED through the doorway as Emma provided covering fire. Once inside, Emma hit an emergency control, and the massive door began to close again. Just before it sealed completely, a figure slipped through the narrowing gap. Susan Parker, her face flushed with exertion, but her eyes blazing with determination. Mom, Jacob gasped. Susan stood facing her twin children, her breathing ragged. Well, she said, isn't this a family reunion? Emma kept her weapon trained on her mother. How did you get ahead of Reeves's team? I know every shortcut in these mountains, Susan replied, and unlike the colonel, I wasn't burdened with trying to take you alive. The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Outside, they could hear muffled shouts and the sound of weapons being prepared. They'll breach the door eventually, Emma's operative warned. Then we don't have much time, Emma said. never taking her eyes off Susan. "Mother, step away from the door and keep your hands where I can see them." Susan complied, moving slowly into the dimly lit entrance hall of the bunker. Her gaze moved to the QED, then back to her daughter. "Emma, whatever you've told Jacob, whatever you believe about the device, you don't have the full picture." "I know enough," Emma replied coldly. "I know about the original test failure. I know about the 3 scientists who died. And I know about the others, the test subjects whose genetic modifications weren't quite right, who were slowly warped by exposure to the quantum field." Jacob looked between them, confusion and dread building in his chest. "What is she talking about, Mom?" Susan's expression tightened. "There were unforeseen complications in the early stages of the project." "Complications?" Emma laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call them? The people whose minds deteriorated until they couldn't form coherent thoughts? The ones whose bodies began to break down at the cellular level?" "That's why I walked away," Susan insisted. "Why I wanted the project shut down." "Except you didn't walk away, did you?" Emma challenged. "You just went deeper underground, continuing your work in secret." A distant explosion shook the bunker, Reeves's team attempting to breach the door. "We need to move deeper inside," Emma's operative urged. Emma nodded, gesturing with her weapon for Susan to walk ahead of them. "Down the corridor, Mother. Time to show Jacob what your brilliant creation really does to people." As they moved deeper into the bunker, Jacob felt as though he were descending into more than just an underground facility. With each step, he was sinking further into a morass of family secrets and scientific horrors that had been hidden from him his entire life. And worst of all, he still didn't know whom to trust. The deeper they went into the bunker, the colder it became. Their footsteps echoed off concrete walls lined with outdated Soviet-era equipment, updated here and there with modern technology. Emma led them through a maze of corridors with the confidence of someone who had studied the layout extensively. "How do you know this place so well?" Jacob asked, walking beside the QED as Emma's operative pushed it on its mobile platform. "I've had years to prepare," Emma replied, keeping her weapon trained on Susan, who walked ahead of them. "To gather intel. To plan for this moment." Another distant explosion rocked the facility. Colonel Reeves's team was persistent. "That door won't hold them forever," Susan observed, her voice eerily calm despite being her daughter's prisoner. "And when they break through, they'll have only one objective: secure the QED at all costs." "Let them try," Emma replied grimly. They reached a heavy blast door at the end of a corridor. Emma gestured for Jacob to help her with another DNA scanner, and the door slid open to reveal a large laboratory space. Unlike the rest of the bunker, this room was state-of-the-art. Modern equipment, computer terminals, and in the center a reinforced platform clearly designed to house the QED. But what drew Jacob's attention were the sealed chambers along one wall. Through thick glass windows he could see medical equipment, monitoring devices, and in one of them, a human figure lying motionless on a bed. "What is this place?" he whispered, horror building in his chest. "The truth," Emma answered simply, directing her operative to position the QED on the central platform. "Mother's legacy." Susan stood rigid, her eyes fixed on the chambers. "You found them," she said softly. "I thought they were all gone." "Not gone," Emma replied bitterly. "Hidden, tucked away where they wouldn't embarrass the project, where their existence wouldn't raise ethical questions." Jacob approached the chamber containing the human figure, a man, perhaps in his 50s, with visible physical abnormalities. His skin had a strange, almost translucent quality, and his limbs were distorted in unnatural ways. "Who is he?" Jacob asked, his voice barely audible. "Dr. Marcus Reed," Susan answered, her composure cracking. "One of the original project scientists. We were..." She stopped, unable to continue. "They were engaged before she met your father," Emma finished. He was one of the first to volunteer for the genetic modification procedures. His body rejected the changes, but not quickly enough to save him from the effects of quantum field exposure. Jacob turned to his mother, searching her face for denial. He found only grief and guilt. "There are 12 others in suspended animation," Emma continued, moving to a computer terminal. "Scientists, soldiers, all victims of Operation Nightingale's early tests." Jacob felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. "All this time? You knew about this?" Susan finally met his gaze. "I tried to help them. Every medical treatment, every experimental therapy, nothing worked. The damage was too extensive." "So you hid them away and moved on with your life," Emma accused. "Started a family, pretended to be a simple farmer's wife, until your past caught up with you." "I never stopped working on a cure," Susan insisted. "My research in Switzerland was focused on reversing quantum field damage," Emma finished for her. "I know, but it wasn't just about helping these people, was it? It was about saving yourself." Jacob looked between them in confusion. "What do you mean?" Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up medical scans on a large wall display. "Show him, Mother. Show him what happens with long-term exposure to the quantum field, even with the genetic modifications." Susan closed her eyes briefly, then slowly rolled up her sleeve. Jacob gasped at the sight of her forearm. The skin had the same translucent quality he'd observed in Dr. Reed, with visible veins that pulsed with an unnatural bluish glow. "It's happening to you too," he whispered. Susan nodded. "Much slower, because my modifications were more successful. But yes, the quantum field changes human tissue at the cellular level. The enhancements delay the effects but don't prevent them entirely." Jacob felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "And Dad?" "William's exposure was minimal compared to mine," Susan replied. "But his recent illness, it's not just age or stress, Jacob. It's the modifications beginning to break down." "And us?" Jacob asked, looking at Emma. "What about us?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "We received the most advanced version of the modifications, in utero. We're more resistant, but not immune. I've already shown early symptoms after my research exposed me to fragments of the quantum field." She pushed up her own sleeve, revealing subtle but unmistakable signs of the same condition on her wrist. The full horror of the situation crashed down on Jacob. Not only was the QED a potentially catastrophic weapon, but the genetic modifications that gave him his mechanical intuition, the traits he'd been quietly proud of his entire life, were a ticking time bomb in his DNA. "This is why you want to neutralize the QED," he realized, looking at Emma. "Not just to prevent it from being weaponized, but to stop the quantum field effects." She nodded. "With the field neutralized, the progression slows significantly. It might give us enough time to develop a true cure." Another explosion, closer this time, shook dust from the ceiling. Colonel Reeves and his team were getting closer. "They're almost through," Emma's operative warned, checking the security feed on his tablet. Emma turned to Susan. "Help me, Mother. Help me neutralize the QED properly, not just put it in dormant mode. You know it's the right thing to do." Susan looked from Emma to Jacob, then to the chamber containing her former fiancé. Decades of guilt, scientific ambition, and maternal protection warred in her expression. "If I help you neutralize it," she said carefully, "all my research, everything I've worked for, it ends. The potential benefits aren't worth the costs," Jacob interrupted, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. "Mom, I've seen enough. Whatever good might come from this technology, it's outweighed by the harm it's already caused." Susan studied her son's face. "You sound like your father." "Good," Jacob replied firmly. "Dad always said that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should." A loud metallic groan echoed through the bunker. The main door was giving way. Emma tensed. We're out of time, Mother. Your decision. Now. For a moment, Susan stood frozen in indecision. Then, with sudden resolve, she strode to the QED and began examining its control systems. You're right, she admitted, her fingers already working to access the device's core programming. I've been lying to myself for too long, convinced that I could control the quantum field, that I could make it safe. She looked up at her children. It can't be controlled, not completely, and the price of trying is too high. Together, Susan and Emma began the complex process of neutralizing the QED, their genetically enhanced minds working in tandem. Jacob watched in awe as mother and daughter, separated for decades by secrets and lies, worked together with intuitive understanding. Despite everything, they shared not just DNA but a profound comprehension of the technology they were dismantling. Jacob took up position by the laboratory door with Emma's operative, listening to the sounds of Reeves's team getting closer. What will happen when they get here? He asked. The operative checked his weapon. Depends on whether we've neutralized the QED by then. If not, we fight. Jacob had never fired a gun in his life, had never imagined being in a situation where he might need to. Now he found himself hoping he wouldn't have to learn. Behind him, Susan announced, "Almost there. The quantum field is collapsing back in on itself." The QED's pulsing glow was diminishing, the humming sound it emitted dropping in pitch. "One final sequence," Emma said, her fingers moving across the controls. "Jacob, we need you." Jacob joined them at the platform. Emma pointed to a section of the control panel. "Your DNA signature here. All three of us together should provide enough authentication to complete the shutdown." Jacob placed his hand on the panel alongside his mother and sister. A tingling sensation ran up his arm as the scanner read his genetic markers. The QED's glow faded further, collapsing inward until only a faint shimmer remained at its core. "It's working," Susan breathed, relief evident in her voice. At that moment, the laboratory door burst open. Colonel Reeves and Major Vasquez rushed in, weapons raised, followed by the rest of their team. "Step away from the device," Reeves commanded. "Now." Emma's operative raised his weapon, but Jacob moved between them. "Wait. Don't shoot. We're neutralizing it, not activating it." "Stand down, Parker," Reeves ordered. "That device is government property." "It's a death trap," Jacob countered. "Look at those chambers. Look at what it did to those people. Look at what it's doing to my mother." Reeves hesitated, his gaze flickering to the medical chambers, then to Susan's exposed arm with its telltale signs of quantum field damage. "Sir," Vasquez said quietly, lowering her weapon slightly. "Maybe we should—" She never finished her sentence. The QED gave a sudden pulse of energy, a shock wave of blue light expanding outward, before collapsing back with a thunderous implosion. When the light cleared, the device sat inert on its platform, its previous glow completely extinguished. "It's done," Susan announced into the ringing silence. "The quantum field has been neutralized." Reeves approached cautiously, his weapon still ready but no longer aimed directly at them. "Neutralized or destroyed?" "Rendered inert," Emma explained. "The quantum field has been collapsed to a stable state. It can't be reactivated." Jacob watched the colonel's face as he processed this information, saw the moment when military discipline gave way to human judgment. "Secure the device for transport," Reeves finally ordered his team. "Dr. Parker, both Dr. Parkers, and Jacob Parker will accompany us back to headquarters for debriefing." As the team moved to execute his orders, Reeves stepped closer to the three Parkers. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "There will be questions, investigations. The work your mother did, the people affected, none of that disappears just because you neutralized the device." "We know," Jacob replied, "but it's a start." 3 days later, Jacob stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sun set over fields that had seemed his entire world just a week ago. Now they felt simultaneously more precious and smaller than he'd ever imagined. The screen door creaked open behind him. William Parker stepped out, leaning heavily on a cane but looking better than he had in months. The advanced medical treatments secured as part of Jacob's agreement with General Phillips were already showing results. "Thinking deep thoughts?" William asked, joining his son at the railing. Jacob smiled, trying to make sense of everything. "Mom, Susan." He corrected himself, still adjusting to the complexity of their family situation. "Says the neutralization of the QED should slow the progression of the genetic deterioration. Give her time to develop a treatment." William nodded. "Your mother always was brilliant, and now she has Emma to help her." The mention of his sister brought a complicated mix of emotions. Emma had gone with Susan to a secure government facility where they could continue their research under supervision. Part protection, part house arrest. "I still can't believe you knew all along," Jacob said. "About Emma being alive, about Mom's work." William sighed, his weathered face showing the weight of decades of secrets. "Not all along. Susan kept me in the dark for years, thought it was safer that way. When I did find out..." He shook his head. "By then, Emma was already deeply embedded in their program. Trying to extract her would have put all of us at risk." The distant sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. A familiar white sheriff's department pickup truck was making its way up the driveway. "Right on time," William noted. Sheriff Collins parked beside the barn and climbed out, moving with the same confident stride Jacob remembered from their first encounter. Had it really been only a week ago? "Evening, Will," the sheriff called, approaching the porch. "Jacob." Jacob nodded in greeting, now understanding the complex history between his father and the sheriff. Tom Collins had been part of the security detail for Operation Nightingale in its early days. He'd been assigned to watch over the Parker family after they left the program, reporting any unusual activities that might indicate William or Susan were breaking their silence about the project. What none of the military planners had anticipated was that Collins would come to genuinely care for the family he was monitoring, especially after Susan's death. "Got something for you," Collins said, handing Jacob an envelope. "Came through official channels. Eyes only." Jacob accepted it with a nod of thanks. The sheriff exchanged a few pleasantries with William, then returned to his truck, which now ran better than it had in years thanks to Jacob's repairs. Once Collins had driven away, Jacob opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note in handwriting he recognized as Emma's. The photo showed Emma and Susan in what appeared to be a sophisticated laboratory, both wearing white coats, both smiling cautiously at the camera. The note read simply, "Progress being made. The Parker family traits are good for something after all. We'll be in touch when we can. E." Jacob handed the photo to his father, who studied it with glistening eyes. "Family business," William murmured, passing it back. Jacob tucked the photo carefully into his pocket. His world had expanded beyond recognition in the span of a week, from repairing tractors to neutralizing quantum weapons, from being an only child to discovering a twin sister, from believing his mother dead to finding her very much alive. Yet as he stood beside his father, watching the sunset paint the fields gold, Jacob realized that some things remained unchanged. The land still needed tending, machines still needed fixing, and family, no matter how complicated, no matter how fractured, was still family. "Come on, Dad," he said, offering his arm for support. "Let's go inside. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day."